Hello, and welcome to another episode of Get Your Fill Financial Independence and Long Life, where we explore ways to achieve those two goals. And we invite folks on to help us. And today, you're just going to be kind of amazed. This is a topic we've never talked about before, but we have Brandon Miller with us today, and he has a company called Maple Immigration Services. And if you think of maple leaves, you might think about Canada. And that's actually what he does. He helps people to immigrate to Canada to get a second passport. And he's got courses, he's got one-on-one consulting, and he's just a really cool, interesting concept that I'm excited to hear what you have to say about that. Brandon, I catch all the highlights there. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Christine. I'm so happy to be here.
So first of all, this is like a really cool idea. I've never heard of anyone doing exactly this before. Was this always like your dream or your goal? Is this how you kind of started life?
No, absolutely not. And it's funny, we joke in our profession. It's like, nobody grows up. Everyone's like, I want to be an astronaut or a policeman or something. Nobody's
Right.
like, I want to be an immigration legal professional. I started off very early on studying law, and then my life changed quite a bit because I decided to go teach English for a year in Korea, about 10 days out of university. Yeah. And then I found my way away from law and then back to it in the 30s. Um, you know, it's funny looking back on it, how interesting life goes. But it was not something that I set out to do. It was something that I actually stumbled on by mistake after I was living in the Philippines, and I had a business in educational consulting. And then I was like, wow, this is really super interesting, and just kind of checked a lot of the boxes for me. So yeah, it's kind of a wayward tale, but it worked out well.
Wow. So you've done a lot of traveling from the sounds of it, at least two cool countries.
Yeah, I lived overseas for about 15 years.
Wow.
So I left. The plan was I was supposed to leave for a year, go teach English, and then come back and do a master's or finish a law degree or do something along those lines. But then I got over there and I was like, wow, this place is absolutely mind-boggling, and I'm learning so much, and the world's so interesting. So I caught a bit of the bug there, and I was going for a year. I stayed for 4.5. I started a business. It did really well at a very young age, and then that's it. But to be honest, I woke up in my 30s and was like, I'm really not happy with what I'm doing. And then that's when I fell into this, and I was like, this is something that I can just like do until retirement. What's that? Like, this isn't work. So yeah, it's been fantastic.
Cool. So, oh God, I just had a complete mind fart. Oh my God. Oh, okay. So is Canada home for you?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean,
So
obviously now it is, but I mean, is that were you returning home when you came back there?
so I grew up here. Obviously, yeah, like I don't know, seventh generation Canadian. So family's pretty endemic to the place. I grew up here, and then I've just traveled, and I returned just because I got married overseas, and then I had a child. So my first daughter was born overseas, and then as soon as like that happens, there's that little like kind of switch in your head of like, it's not all about me anymore. What's best for my, infant daughter here? So we decided to move back to Canada, just because of all the opportunity that was here for that. And there was a number of different events that led up to that, and the timing was great. And I was like, I'm gonna go back to Canada. So the beauty is, for me, just as a side note, because I touched on this a little bit, the travel became very like infectious. Like I really, it was addictive. Like I love going, to different places in the world. And what you find out is actually the world is actually a really small place. People are the same no matter where you go. You take away like the religion, the politics, all of that stuff, and you just look at people. People just want to like, basically live a nice, easy life with their family, make a decent wage, and be left alone. And that, pretty much. So it's funny because then you start looking at the different cultures and everything, but me wanting to come back here, immigration, instead of me going to it, I'm actually bringing it here and helping people settle into Canada and providing them a really good opportunity. So that actually checks all those boxes.
Cool. So I know for the US, you can have dual citizenship, right? So you can have a not dual citizenship,
Absolutely.
but just a second complete passport. I mean, how does
No,
that work?
you can have dual citizenship.
Yeah.
So the American and Canadian systems actually work really well together in terms of advantages. Obviously, geographically, we're pretty close together. Ideologically, I think a lot of everything is in line. Especially regionally, if you look at somebody from California, they're going to have a lot in common with somebody in Vancouver, and synergistically, if you look at somebody from New York and Toronto, it's gonna kind of be along the same mindset, right? So I always say like regionalism goes like north to south. Like if you look at like Saskatchewan and like Middle America, they're going to be kind of in line as well too. So it's really interesting in that respect. But yeah, you can have two passports. You can depending on how you plan and how you put things together. There's so many advantages to that, both monetarily, occupation, like job-wise, worker mobility, weather-wise even too, right? All of these different things. So healthcare is a big one, I think, for my American clients. A lot of people will reach out to me. Usually I get people in there like their late 30s. They're like, hey, we want to come to, why do you want to come here? Oh, I heard I can get free healthcare. I was doing some computing of what my retirement's going to look like and what my healthcare premiums are going to be like. So why don't I do that? Yeah. So I don't know, tons of advantages.
I know depending on who's in office, I randomly have friends who are, threatening to, to emigrate to Canada because
That's
they're not
really,
happy with the political system.
you know what? It's really, really interesting because I watch that quite a bit, and we always see a huge bump. So you can see that you'll see that pop up in the news, like Canadian immigration website crashes and stuff like that, or Google will show all the searches and everything, and it hits the news. So it's funny because we always see a bump in that, but what happens is what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years is there was always that election bump, and I never really treated that very seriously because a lot of people, they're like, I'm gonna move to Canada, and it's like, yeah, okay, and then they find out they have to do an English test, and they're like, yeah, okay, it's all too difficult, and then they just go out back on and do their thing. But what happens, I find, is that people, I've been getting a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, we want to move, and then they're taking the steps and they're doing it and they're working through it, and we didn't really see that before, but I'm seeing that more and more. And it's funny because, this was like, not to date myself, but I remember in like the 80s and like 90s, and I was younger back then, but I remember like the green card, a lot of Canadians were moving to the US and stuff, but I think we're really starting to see a reversal of that, where you're starting to see a lot more interest. And people are like, wow, why wouldn't I have this? Because of all the benefits that it gives me. So, yeah, but the political thing, I think, is more reactionary.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Some people will do it. I shouldn't say that because I have a few clients right now that are like, yeah, I don't like where this is going and I'm leaving. And they are doing it. So, but I think a lot of people just kind of talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was surprised as a real estate agent how many people were just up and moving house because of the pandemic, which I personally thought was going to last about 2 months.
Right. Yeah. You're getting similar stuff, eh? Like, are you getting people like moving out of the urban area?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of the same here. It's really driven up like housing prices in places where
No one wanted to live
traditionally,
before.
right? Like there's a place here, they were talking about growth wise and CAA, which is, you've got AA,
Yep.
AAA.
AAA.
They did no, sorry, excuse me. That's not true. It was U-Haul. U-Haul was doing a survey on where the moving was going. And like people were moving to like North Bay and like Sudbury. and like Belleville, like these are places that nobody was like 5, 6 years ago. I shouldn't say that. I should be careful if anyone's listening from those areas. Get all the pitchforks and people coming out. I they were moving, like people are moving up there, and it's like, these places are like remote. Like you kind of do have use for bear spray up there. Like it's not Belleville as much, but it's these are like the number one spots where people are moving. And it's cold, and I don't want to say desolate because that's not true. It's still a city and stuff,
Has its
but
own type of beauty.
it's far from an airport, let's say, an international airport. But, yeah, it has its own type of beauty. But yeah, no, it's things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting. So you're talking about that there are a lot of, I mean, I lived in the UK for a couple of years, and I thought about getting a passport there, but there it takes 4 years. And how long does it take to get your Canadian passport if you're an American, if you're USian?
It takes 3 years on the quickest, but if you're here on a temporary basis, prior to becoming a permanent resident. Now, a permanent resident would be the same thing as having a green card in the States. So you're not like, you're allowed to stay as a permanent resident and work and like live your life, but you don't have a passport. So we call that a permanent resident. And then what happens is that if you have time before that, you actually get credit for half days upwards of a year. So basically, if you're here for 2 years as a permanent resident, then you can actually short track your time to permanent residency by a year. So it would only take 2 years to get. So we see a lot of people that are coming up and doing studies. Studies has actually been one of the biggest areas of growth for the immigration system here in Canada. So a lot of people are looking at that in terms of coming up, studying, getting a work permit, and then transitioning into permanent residency, for example. Yeah, it's pretty quick, I guess. Time goes pretty quickly. And then once you get that, that's it. You're done.
They can't kick you out.
No, they can't kick you out. It's funny. It's funny you say that, because I love when my joke with some of my clients, I'm like, there, now you're a citizen. You can murder somebody and not get deported. So you're in, right? But right, exactly. But if in case you ever wanted to murder, no, but you have tenure, right? Like that's it. You have all of the benefits. I think during the pandemic, what's surprising to me, as we talk about the pandemic and some of the trends we've seen, I think for the first time in the Western world, a lot of people have actually felt what the rest of the world felt, where they were restricted with their movement and their travel. Yeah. And I think with borders being closed, like a lot of, what do you mean I can't take my cruise? Like I've got vacation, right?
One of my friends is a Canadian citizen, and she's like, I can't go.
Yeah, they really, and that's why, like having a passport like that, for instance, you have a right of entry. And again, there's other things that happened there with like Quarantine Act and different things like that. But
I don't think it was that she technically couldn't go. It's that she didn't want to quarantine for 14 days or whatever, to go. Which was, I think, the rule at that time. Yeah.
It's all, well, good thing now is that it's all kind of gone away, albeit a few little asterisks is there, but everything seems to be getting back to where it kind of should be, I guess.
So as far as opportunities, like, what, as a person, is it like, well, I'm an entrepreneur. So as an entrepreneur, what would be the advantages for me to come to Canada for, are there like entrepreneurial opportunities that I could potentially take advantage of there, and what's going on?
Ooh, where do I begin? So the first one is that if somebody's working, for instance, you could come as a tourist. And again, I just want to preface this that, I'm talking in very general terms. And obviously I don't want to, here's the legal advice. Like, this is not legal advice, right? I'm talking generally here. Yeah. So people can show up, they can come in as a tourist, and as long as they're not entering the Canadian labor market, i.e. working at a Canadian company or taking away a job from a Canadian, for instance, people can live and do whatever they want. And that's fine. And what you'll find is, and this is, I'm seeing this a lot with like remote workers, especially people in the IT field. I've got a few clients where they're like, they're shopping different locations based on internet connection, because they're like, listen, I can come up there and I can live cheaper. I'm making US money, which is an extra 20 points on the dollar right now. And my dollars is a lot further. And I'm having like a really great experience. Like, I know people that are literally going and transplanting themselves next to like world-class, like skiing, right? Because that's what they want to do. So they want to work. And then it's like, yeah, I'm going to grab my skis and I'm going to go do that. And they'll just pick up an Airbnb or rent a place and do what they want to do. So we've seen a lot of that, like with remote workers. If somebody wants to get more involved in it, one of the key things, especially for Americans, depending on how much money you have and the size of your operation, you can actually open a branch office here in Canada through, the old NAFTA, or I think, you guys call it USMCA. I think we call it CUSMA. We can't even agree on what it's going to be called anymore. But you always hear in those things whenever NAFTA hits the airwaves, it's always about like, how, somebody's screwing up farmers or something like that, But what you have to understand is that under those trade agreements, there's worker mobility provisions, right? And there's also like occupations, skilled occupations, for instance, like there's a designated list of occupations that you can come in. If you have the right credentials and you have a job, you can literally drive up to the border. I'm doing my little driving thing there, right? Drive up to the border and present the proper set of paperwork. And then what's going to happen is you'll be issued a work permit right on the spot. Now, a work permit allows you to, that's a whole different level. That allows you to come in, access all the benefits here, access the healthcare, live, pay taxes, et cetera, et cetera. You should ask me about taxes, because that's what everybody asks me about. Like,
okay.
Taxes. That's a really hot topic. But then you can live your, live your life. You can work. You can do your stuff, and access healthcare, which is a big one for a lot of people, and also clock up time towards permanent residency if that's what you want to do. In terms of other benefits as well, there's a number of different programs that are available, and depending again on the size, like I'm dealing with companies that are, very well funded and have are looking at Canada as a way to diversify. So for instance, we have some people in the crypto world that are, looking at different, what is the regulation going to be like in the States? Should I be looking at some sort of extra location just in case, kind of things like that. So, there's a number of different opportunities. There's a lot of different government support. If you're both a Canadian and American, you can actually tap into like the trade commissioners and different things at the different embassies to be able to spread the business as well. And we have programs that are actually aimed at entrepreneurs. So for instance, a self-employed program is somebody who's employed in sport or in art at a world-class level. For instance, they can come in and they can immigrate to Canada under those programs. Or somebody who comes in with a tech idea. The tech industry, there's a number of different opportunities in there as well to be able to get here and actually be supported as well. So, yeah.
Interesting. So are there tax advantages?
Yeah, good question. I'm so happy you asked me that. No, it's one of the big questions we get, and I generally steer away from it. See, that was kind of a bait and switch, right? Ask me that, but now I'm steering.
I'm not going to answer that question.
Oh, right? No, because it's really complex, but it's a question that I get a lot, and I always say, well, I'm not really an accountant, but but here's what I do know about it. So, if you're talking Canada and the US, and actually a lot of different countries, there's a lot of tax treaties out there. So I can tell you as an American, if you're coming here, you're not going to be double taxed. You're actually going to pay the difference. And if you're really smart about it and you pay people who are really smart, there's a number of different advantages that you can have to be able to kind of, I don't want to say play both sides, but kind of play both sides from a business perspective. But that takes planning and preparation. And that is something that you can do actually quite well. I've seen some, just looking at some of the things that my clients have done, and I'm like, huh, that's really smart. Like really smart. Like there's a number of different things in there for that. Again, there's this perception that we have really high taxes. And I'm always very quick to shoot that down. I'm like, yeah, we've got taxes, but look at what you get for that, right? You know, I've been in countries, I've lived in countries where I live tax-free. And as a Canadian, when I go overseas, I get to claim non-residency. And you see me smiling now because when I worked over and I was teaching English in Korea, one of my best friends, he's from Tallahassee, and he was always like, "Duh, I gotta pay taxes." And I was like, you know, I was living tax-free because there's a way to become a non-resident. So
Yeah.
as an American, you're taxed based on your citizenship, whereas a Canadian, you're taxed based on your residency. So when I leave Canada and I live outside for so many years, I lived in the Middle East for a little bit too, and you know, I was literally leaving a tax-free life. Like it's pretty awesome. So you get this money and you actually get to keep it. But yeah, no, I think the thing there, because again, common question that I get is if you are smart about it and you get good advice and you set it up in advance, you can do some really smart and good things there. There's a lot
Cool.
of advantage there.
Interesting. So what's sort of the normal trajectory for someone who's coming and saying, okay, this is it. I definitely want to, at the very least, be a dual citizen, you know, if not like permanently relocate to Canada.
So it's different for everybody. And one of the things that I talk about is I was watching people do this for a number of years. And a lot of times people will come and they'll come to me and they'll say, Brandon, I want to get my permanent residency. Can you help me? And I say, yeah, sure, no problem. Prior to doing this, I used to help people get settled into Canada. And you know, I've seen some people do very well here and settle in very nicely. And I've seen other people not do so well. And it's very sad when they don't do very well. But you know, there's no secret to this. The secret is that people just need to have a plan. And so I'm big on planning and strategic planning and having, you know, backups and different things like that. And there's no difference in doing well here. There's a direct correlation between planning and knowing what you're doing and doing well as opposed to not doing well. So getting back to your trajectory question, it all really starts with a plan. People need to have their plan in place. It's different for everybody. And then they have to understand that it's not only the immigration plan, but what are you going to do when you get here? And I always like to remind people that, you know, getting here is the easy part. A lot of people think like, oh, if I get there, everything will be, you know, it's cool. I can just figure it out. It's like, no, you're going to waste so much time as opposed to going directly to, you know, where you want to be in the labor market and then knowing how to kind of, you know, traverse that very well. And it's different where, you know, some people might come from different cultures where they're gonna stumble a bit more because they're not really used to the way things are done, or they might have some language impediments or different things like that. But again, somebody coming from, say, a Western country like again, the US or the UK or something, it's going to be pretty easy to figure that out because it's very similar in a lot of respects, and as long as you understand that you have kind of that stuff in tandem, you're good. Can I keep going because I'm babbling on a little bit? Or
No, you're fine. You can babble.
okay. So I wanted to you asked about some of the trajectory. There's a few different ways that you could do that. You can come in as a student. We're seeing a lot of people do that, which is basically you'll come in for a year or 2 years, for instance, you'll study. And then after that, you can get a 1 to 3 year work permit, which allows you to transition into a job and then use that for skilled work experience to be able to get your PR and then your citizenship. Somebody could come in as a business person. They can come in, they can set up a company, or they can come in and get a job, for instance. And then they can move through that. They can use that work experience to be able to get their permanent residency. One of the other trajectories or pathways that we see people go through is that they'll come in and they'll file an application direct. This has been a little slow as of late because of the pandemic. They were really focusing on people that were in Canada because the borders were closed. They've indicated that that's going to be a little bit slower, but there was also recently in the last 48 hours or so, they've kind of backtracked on that because they're getting a lot of pushback. So there's a direct pathway as well. There was investor pathways. They're kind of closed where you can basically just come in and put money on the table and, do an investment and then get your PR that way. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Also, actually, there's a few more. If you actually have Canadian relatives as well, like, and I mean like parents. I just spoke with a guy 2 weeks ago, and he's like, he didn't even know he was Canadian. He was born here as an infant, and he was in the States. And he's like, what do I do to become Canadian? I'm like, man, you're already Canadian. You can go apply for a passport and you're good. And then It was funny because I had mentioned to him about it, and then he's got an older son that's going to school, and his son was going to university next year. And he said to me, he's like, we started just talking on the side about it, and he's like, we're talking tuition rates. And I said, yeah, we don't have the wild swings that you guys have. Like, we don't have in-state or out-of-state tuition or private, public, it's all kind of even keel. And he's like, what is that? And I was like, nah, maybe $5,000 or $6,000 a year. He's like, a year? Not a semester? I'm like, no. And then it's funny.
Not a class.
Yeah, right. I wouldn't say that. I won't say his name, but he's like, blah, pack your bags. You're going to school in Canada. Like, he's just like, it was pretty funny. So yeah. There's a lot of people that don't know that. There's a lot of people that, they're not aware of some of the lineage there. Actually, not a lot. I've had a few. Yeah, and that's another thing too, is once you become a citizen here or a PR, depending on where you're born and stuff, that actually does get handed down. So.
Yeah, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that can pay for the whole experience right there. It's interesting. I want to just go back to what you were saying about getting settled in, because it's also, I know, I don't want to say a lot, but I know some people who had intended to take an assignment in another country, be an expat, and having done that myself, it can be difficult. And it's not just the finding work, or it's not just it's the whole thing. Like, I was in the UK. I mean, okay, two great countries separated by a common language, right? That's what they say about that.
Right.
And I spent it's just different. I think maybe worse because you expect it to be more the same. But I spent like a whole weekend trying to buy what we call dish towels, which they apparently call tea towels. No one even knew what the heck I was talking about. I'm like, dishes, you want to dry them? You're like, what, And it was just so frustrating. I had no idea what store to go to. You come up to the meat counter and you want to buy some, and you just don't, I don't know what a kilo is. How much meat am I going to buy? You know what I mean? I end up with some huge slab of, right? There are just so many little nuances that you just don't think about. So helping people get settled socially, I think, is also really important. People think, well, I'm just going to, I'm going to make friends. Well, eventually you'll make friends, but in the meantime, it can be very isolating, right? You feel like, oh man, I'm just here all by myself. I could die in my apartment and no one's ever going to know about it, until.
Oh man,
right.
Yeah, I actually had that conversation. I got so sick when I was in the Philippines, and I was there and I knew one other person. And I was so sick that I was like, I had a king size bed and I literally sweat it through, right? Not to get too graphic here or anything, but I was literally having that conversation. I'm like, if I die here, like, who's going to find me and when? And I know what you mean about the isolating. Like, this is the thing. It's, you can either embrace it, or you can, like, it can get very dark. And I think a lot of times, like, man, I was in Korea in like the 90s. And, the country had only been open for about 10 years. Like, it was the 88 Olympics. So it was very, I was in Korea, like, I was really in Korea. I had to travel 3.5 hours to get to a Burger King, and I was like, I was like, I was never so like happy to see a Whopper, you know. I was like, man, this is fantastic. And it's crazy. But it was also a great experience. I did a lot of reading, and I got to the point where you got to dive in. And I'll tell you what, it was 10 days from this thing entering into my head and me being on the ground in the old airport in Seoul, Kimpo. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, wow, I recognize the Korean airplane and the Coca-Cola sign, and that's it.
That's it.
Like
Whole different
it was a
alphabet, right?
whole,
Whole different language. Everything
oh,
was so different.
oh. And but here's the thing, right? If I was very unprepared, everything that I just said about being prepared and having a plan, that's
How
all
you
out
know
the
that's
window.
important now.
Yeah, right. But it was one of the best experiences. And I find anywhere you go, as long as you have a smile on your face, you learn how to say hi and I'm sorry and thank you in the
I'm sorry is
language,
key.
you're good. You're good. And a lot of thumbs up and okay, you're good. But it is, coming to Canada, and I see this with a lot. Like I helped people for 2 years settle in. And I'll give you an example. So people would come and they'd say they're a nurse, right? I'll take somebody from overseas, like the Philippines, because we've got a lot of Filipino nurses that come here, right? Not to generalize or anything,
Right.
but there's a lot of Filipino nursing schools. There's like 430 in the Philippines when I was there, because I worked in education there. They were minting out nurses because a lot of people saw it as like a way to kind of work overseas, right?
Themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. So, we've got a lot of Filipino nurses here. And so, for instance, you can start, our stuff is done as for you, it's done statewide, and you can actually start the registration process prior to coming here. So I always tell people, I'm like, why don't you do that stuff while you're there, as opposed to like, oh, I need that document, so I have to call my sister who's going to have to go to my university, and then I'm going to have to give them this document to like fill things out and then get this, and then it's going to have to be sent over and it's going to cost me money on FedEx.
Right.
And why wouldn't I just do that first, understand all that stuff, and then focus on getting it done so that when I get here, I can get into my job quickly and start earning the money that I want to earn, as opposed to transitional wages that I'm trying not to learn or trying not to earn. I want to earn higher. So a lot of times, it's just, if like I always like you got to know, you just got to know what you're looking at, as opposed to know what you don't know, until you don't know it, or whatever.
You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly, right? So yeah, I don't know. It's great that you've had that experience, because you understand. And I think a lot of other people don't. That sometimes people are trying to escape things, and it's like, no, you can't really escape it. That's not the right reason.
Right.
So you have to have those conversations. And that's why whenever I talk to people, I'm like, tell me why you want to come what do you want to come here for? And there's people that I will tell them, I'm like, you should actually not come here. You're going to make a big mistake.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it's great that you've had that experience, though, because you really understand what's going to take for people to succeed as an expat, or as a person, just introducing themselves to a new country.
I get that a lot. People are like for instance, one of my criteria for anybody who works with me is they have to be able to empathize with somebody's journey when they're going through, and they have to understand what they're feeling. And it's funny, I laugh sometimes when people will say to me, they'll say, oh, I'm paying you this money just to fill out paper. I'm like, come on, man. If you think I'm just like a document, like transcribe, like data, I'm your data entry guy, it's like, you have no idea what I do. It's basically, it's funny. I was talking to somebody else. I said, I'm like your Sherpa. Like I bring you through the journey, right? I'm your immigration Sherpa. It's when people are sitting there and they're like at night and they don't know what's going on, they can pick up the phone. I can say, yeah, everything's cool. Like everything is progressing as it should, because I know what the next steps are. And this is where one of the biggest mistakes that I see is people get on the website and they're like, oh, it's all on the website, I can just do this. And I'm like, no, you can't, because there's all those policy manuals and training things and the stuff that the officer is going to do. And oh, by the way, there's this thing called the law. It's not the website, right? You have to know what all these things are. And if there's an issue, a really big one for Americans that people get caught up is DUIs, for instance, right? If you have a DUI, that's actually considered serious criminality here, and you're inadmissible to Canada. And I can tell you that a lot of people will come up here on a business trip, and the way that our computer systems are very interlinked, the officer there has all of the information, and they can just say, have you ever had a DUI? Well, yeah, everybody gets DUI, whatever. Oh, well, guess what? You're not coming in today. And then how is that going to work out for your meeting that you're going to have, that you're supposed to be at because you're coming in for the day?
Wow.
Yeah, it's like little things like that. It throws a lot of people off. Now, the thing is that there's a way around that. It's called a TRP, which is a temporary resident permit. You pay $200, they'll issue this thing, and it allows you to overcome the inadmissibility. But it's not something that you do all the time. You can get it once. It's kind of a give me.
You can't get to stop
So,
the DUI business.
well, it's funny. It actually drives a lot of the border guys up here crazy, because they'll get a lot of American business guys that'll come up and they'll be like, yeah, I got that DUI. I just want to pay that $200 fine and go. And they're like, no, it doesn't work like that. So anyways, but no, it's good. It's really good. I think it's good though to have those life experiences as well. Sounds like you had it. How was your experience? Was it positive for you?
It was in the end, yeah, it was really positive and I loved it. But it was, there's that transitional period where you just like, what the heck did I do? And you don't know what you're going to miss, the weirdest things. You just like, I don't know, just things that you, right? Did you find that when you're overseas, where you just like, oh,
Oh
I
yeah.
really like when you're saying like I really want to go to Burger King. Like I never go to Burger King, but I
I
just,
never. It
yeah.
was you're clamping on to home, right? And it's so funny. It was like, somebody had shown up with like mac and cheese, like craft dinner, right? We call it craft dinner up here. But it was almost like a death match to the like, give me some of that. Like, and it's like I would eat that as a kid, but it's so funny because you don't really have the ability to get that to get some of those things. At least I didn't back then. I like literally when I was in there, this was around 1997. I don't know if you remember, there was the IMF, the International Monetary Fund Asian crisis. So I literally arrived and my check went like in half right away. So I was like, no, whatever, I'm here for the experience. That sucks. I'm not going to pay those student loans off like I planned. But it literally, I was in a town of like almost 1 million people, and there was about 200 foreigners, like non-Koreans, and it went down to like 30. Like there were 30 of us. And it's weird because people were like, hey man, I saw you out at the thing. It's like people know who you were, where you were on the weekend. It was like you stick out like a sore thumb. It was surreal. It was really
Yeah.
surreal. You had to watch yourself too, because it was like everyone knows where all your movements, right?
Right.
So
Interesting.
couldn't blend in.
So, Brandon, what advice would you give to people who are thinking that they might like to make this type of move?
The advice that I would give is this: is that there's a lot of really good advantages to people, but you have to understand what those are first off. And it's not something like if you're just like kind of pissy with the government of the day. I don't think that that's really a good idea to move. There's a lot of other, it's funny. I saw that Ryan Reynolds was on one of the talk shows there, and he's like, "Don't come to Canada when you're angry with the government." It was kind of funny, but it's true. I actually I know that there's people that want to do that. I have one lady right now from California that I'm dealing with, and she does want to move because of that reason. She doesn't see it in line, but she's coming to Canada. She's doing exploratory trips. She's checking out where she wants to go. She's speaking with a tax professional to see how she can move her retirement and do all of that. And she's actually doing all of the right stuff. So yes, her motivation is she doesn't see the opportunity, it's not in line with where she wants to be, but she's doing it properly, which it's not a reactionary thing. So I think that that's actually something that people have to look at first. And then from there, not to shamelessly self-promote myself, but reach out to a professional, whether it be me or somebody else, it doesn't matter, but really a professional that actually works in this area and get some proper advice. But also look at what you're going to do when you get here. Don't think about like just getting here and then you'll figure it out. Bad move, really bad move. Because there's so much opportunity and stuff if you have a plan. Yeah.
Well, and they should probably buy your book as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Shamelessly self-promote. Yeah. So yeah, actually here, I'm going to put it up because graphically, I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
It's like planning, implementation, and settlement. Like it's so basic. And then I have all these different steps with this, but yeah, this is a light read where people can actually go through and they can think about a lot of things that they're going to have to think about. And then there's a bunch of, I go through the different stages and how people should actually transition. So it starts off first with getting a plan, put that together, and then understanding that you're dealing with a moving target, because the immigration system, like over the last few years, has changed quite a bit in ways that, I haven't predicted or have any of my colleagues predicted. Like there's things that have changed just because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But if you understand that and you can move around it, then you're good. And then on top of that, you have to implement it. And then the biggest thing, which is the red arrow there, is the settlement. Man, I really bang that home because unfortunately, when you talk to an immigration lawyer or a consultant, a lot of them are just focused on getting you here and that's what their job is. And they don't do that. But I like to take more of a holistic approach to it.
Yeah. And I think that's what sets you apart.
It really does. And I've actually, what I've done is I've assembled other professionals as part of Second Passport. And I think that's important. Like we've got people that deal with real estate. We've got people that deal with like businesses and accountants and bookkeepers and different things like that. And I've asked them to join my group and help educate my people, right? My second passporters, as I call them, because, as smart as I think I am, I'm not an accountant, and I like to have other people there because these are the things that people need to take into account when they're moving. You have to take a holistic approach to this.
Definitely. So Brendan, what do you wish I would have asked you that I didn't think to ask you? What do you really think you need to share with people?
It's funny. First thing that popped into my head, I think about one conversation that I had, and it was probably about two years ago. And there was a lady, she was, and I got to be careful because I don't want to out her because she was in a very high level position. She worked in the tech industry and she was literally at the top of one of those nice apps that we use. And I said to her, she had, Ivy League double MBAs from a couple of Ivy League schools. And I said to her, why do you want to come to Canada? And she said something to me that I have never forgotten. She said, you know what? I'm a first generation immigrant here to the United States. And my parents came here for opportunity. And she had a child, a very young child. And she said, I just don't see the opportunity here for my child right now. I don't know what's, things are going to look like in 50 or 70 years from now. And I think that, immigration is a tool that you use for accessing opportunity and opportunity moves. And I was like, whoa, like I'm really impressed. And I meet people, not a lot of times, but I meet people that are really forward thinking and they're thinking like, this is what the world looks like today. What is it going to look like in 30, 40, or 50 years? And what I look at and what I think that a lot of people in the Western world are starting to kind of wise up to, for instance, like if I have clients from China or India, they're like, yeah, I need that passport because it's going to change my world. And I also need maybe a backup and a place to put some money because I don't know what's going on in the system over here. A lot of times, if you think about it, a second passport is a very powerful tool that you can actually use to find new opportunity, not only for yourself, but in the world of next year and 10 years and 20 years. And what's that going to look like for your kids?
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the things that is really impressive to me is that that's what she left me with, was that things are changing. We've seen them over the last couple of years change quite a bit in different directions that maybe we wouldn't have thought. And I think that now a lot of different people are maybe having those conversations, and some of the fissures that we had in the places that we've been at, we've seen them kind of boil to the forefront, and people are asking these questions. And I that's kind of, I don't know if that's really a question that you could have articulated somehow, but I think about that quite a bit, because it's just a perspective on a lot of people have, and yeah, and funny, just as a side note, I had another lady, she was from China, and she was deciding between Australia and Canada. And she said something to me, and this was about 6 or 7 years ago. She said, "Oh, I think I want to go to Canada because I think that there's going to be more water there because of global warming." And I was like, and she was like, in 70 years. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. But it's funny because I hear about the global warming argument where people are starting to look at what are things looking like with rising sea levels and resources, like really rudimentary stuff. And people are thinking ahead to that. It just impresses me that there's this segment of people out there that are not just living in the next, now, the 3 to 5
What's
years.
for dinner? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They're thinking way in advance, and not only about themselves, but generations to come.
That's
so
amazing. Yeah.
It impresses me. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Interesting. Brandon, how can people get in touch with you if they want to kind of continue the conversation and, kick some ideas around and, possibly even make the move?
Yeah, so I generally tell people just to email me. I know that's really schmarmy, but no, because it's like, oh, go here and fill in your information and get my lead magnet and stuff. I don't really, that's not how I kind of roll with this, because it's such an individualized thing. So people can just email me at brandon@mysecondpassport.ca, not .com.ca. And just the only thing is if they let me know where they heard me and why they want to go to Canada. Because if you were listening to this previous, I always ask people, why do you want to come here? And I really do. I'm genuinely interested. I will tell you that goes directly to me. It's not some virtual assistant in some far off land, and I will personally respond to you. And also, I will send you an e-copy of my book if you'll read it.
Awesome.
So there you go. Just send me an email.
Oh, that's awesome. Brandon, it was such a great time talking with you, and you really gave me some things to think about and opened my eyes about a lot of things, including where the water is going to be in 70 years, thinking about those kind of things. Well, and thank you, listener, for listening. I know we have listeners in over 40 countries. So
Wow.
Yeah. So who knows, where folks are listening who might be thinking that Canada would be a wonderful place to live and to raise their children and send them to less expensive schools and things like that, and potentially better schools, depending on where you're coming from. And I know, listeners, that you have a choice of over 2 million podcasts and so I'm really excited that you're here and listening to us today. And Brandon, thank you very much.
Thank you.